find out if the state of New Jersey is holding any unclaimed property in your name, and if so, you have the right to redeem that and get your money back. The state holds hundreds of millions of dollars in this site. I personally found $100 on there and cashed in a matter of a couple of weeks. They sent me a check. I've had students over the course of the last couple of years find tens of thousands of dollars. One guy found 30 grand he didn't know he had. So if you get a chance, go log on, get yourself a nice little holiday payday for January. And if you don't find anything, well, at least you tried. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. But if you do find something, I don't get a commission. No, I should be charging. But, you know, if you drop off a nice bottle of single malt at the school, I would be okay with that, just saying. But again, the state of New Jersey has this site, unclaimedproperty.nj.gov. Go on there, enter your name, and you may find something. If not, enter your relatives' names. Maybe they've got something there. And if you lived in any other state, go check out their websites. There may be money that you didn't know you had coming to you, and it will be coming in handy right about now when all those credit card bills from Christmas come in. They'll pay off those bills. All right, so there you go. Now, why did I bring that up? Because we're going to talk about escheat. Escheat is what happens to property when someone dies without a will and there's no heirs to claim it. So this is what happens. Someone dies, has no will, and there are no apparent surviving heirs to the estate. The state of New Jersey turns this over to probate court, which will do what's called a law of descent search. They'll actually be very proactive, go out and try to find a relative to hand the inheritance off to. And if they do, well, that person then inherits the estate. The only problem with an inheritance is that you have to pay all the associated debts of the inheritance before you can collect the inheritance. And if it's real property, you may have mortgage bills, utility bills, tax bills that have to be paid before you can redeem the property. And if so, maybe you have to sell the property, and whatever's left after all the expenses are paid is what your actual inheritance would be. So if there is no heir that they identify, then the state takes the property and sells it at public sale and keeps the money. So do yourself a favor. Go check out and see if anybody's got money coming to them. And if so, ka-ching, you just hit the payday. Yeah, baby. Not any other school will give you that information, but here at the Real Estate Center for Real Estate Education, we give you everything and then some. Boy, did I just make that up, huh? But it sounded good. I hope you find something. Good hunting. And if you do, let us know. But anyway, escheat, once again, is where ownership of private property reverts to the state of New Jersey when an owner dies without a will and there's no heirs to give it to. Any questions so far about escheat? A couple folks typing, so I'll hang on. Holy crap, I just found a claim for my dad on there. Nice! Patrick, you're going to be your father's favorite son in a matter of minutes. All right. Anybody else with a question or concern before we move on? Can an heir reject the inheritance so they don't have to pay it? No, Jesus, you're not allowed to reject an inheritance. Sorry to say. I have no idea, Robert. I have no idea. I don't believe it does. I don't believe it collects interest. I could be wrong, but I don't think so. I found in and claimed, so, oh, Sergio, instant payout, baby. Nice. All right. Nice to hear, guys. But is there any questions about these things we're talking about? But good for you guys. Glad you're finding stuff. Remember, bottle single malt, just dropped at the school. It's okay. You don't have to, but you just say. All right, so let me moderate the conversation and we will move on. And that website is still visible to you right there, top of the chat section. So if you haven't done it, take that address, copy it, and paste it into your browser and go look sometime. All right, so we covered the 4 basic police or government powers over private property owners. Now we're going to talk about public land use controls. So we had the government powers and private powers, and now we're going to talk about public, meaning everybody collectively through governing bodies of law. So, little history. He's not dead, though, so then have your dad claim the amount, Christopher. He can do it, or you can do it for him. So, public land use controls. Municipal governments authorized to implement local master plans. What is that all about? Well, here's the thing. In 1976, the state of New Jersey enacted the municipal land use laws. There were no codified body of law governing what towns should or shouldn't do when it came to development or long-term planning. It was left up to every town to decide what they wanted to do, and in a way still is, but under a general agreed to way to do it, process and procedure. So under the municipal land use laws that were created in 1976, every municipality in the state of New Jersey was required and is still required to create, use, update, and amend as necessary a municipal master plan. No, this is not how you're going to take over the world. Not that kind of master plan. But a master plan is a document. It's more than just a document. It's a number of documents. It's a compendium. It's a huge voluminous index containing all kinds of information about how and when your town was created, formed, incorporated, founded, whatever you want to say. It's also a list of all the information that occurred in the history of the town. It was created, it was formed, it was incorporated, whatever, and then this is how it started to develop. These were the industries in the area. It was farming, agricultural. Some areas like Oakland, we had Native Americans living in the area still when we incorporated 300 years ago. And many other ways that your town has been shaped over the years and to where it is today. This master plan is also a compendium of documents related to natural and man-made resources that the town enjoys, the current situation in town, what current economic, geographic, demographic, political, financial pressures are being incurred against the town and how you're responding to and how you handle them. This master plan is also a forward-looking document into the future as to how the town is looking to shape its development or redevelopment as time goes by. The master plan is reviewed and updated every 6 years by your town's planning department. The planning committee, commission, department, whatever you want to call it, is responsible to review and update the master plan every 6 years to incorporate any changes that occur. And believe me, in today's date, a lot of things change very quickly. So the planning board has to meet and update the master plan as necessary, minimally every 6 years, to guide development and future development or redevelopment of a town. Under this master plan, it asks that all towns incorporate zoning requirements for residential, commercial, industrial, institutional, recreational, and other types of properties. So every town now has specific named and required zoning issues for each zone of property holders. Under the public land use controls, they're concerned about incompatible zones abutting each other. So if you have an industrial area next to a residential area, that's not very good. That's not very good planning. So in order to offset the encroachment or infringement of all the noise, pollution, smoke, light, noise, whatever. From the industrial zone to residential zone, there may be a required buffer zone between the two. A buffer zone is usually a strip of land that's no less than like 75 feet wide. It is a bermed zone of land. It's raised, and on top there's evergreen trees stagger planted every couple feet all the way down that distance. Why? An evergreen tree stays green all year long and buffers the residential going against impending light infiltration, noise it buffers a little bit about, smoke and pollution it buffers against, visual issues. So buffer zones are created to minimize incompatible zones against each other. There's also the Mount Laurel decisions that we can talk about. Remember, we talked the other day about the Mount Laurel decisions, but if the Mount Laurel decision prohibits what's called exclusionary zoning. There were actually some towns in the state of New Jersey that said, well, we don't have any zones that accommodate low and moderate income earners, so we can't put them in there. It's excluded from all these zones. You can't do that. That's unconstitutional. Therefore, low and moderate income housing must be allowed in any and all residential areas. Now, there are smart ways to do this, and then there are just haphazard ways to do it. It is rather unfortunate some towns just haphazardly approach this, while other towns are meticulous in their ways to approach this. But exclusionary zoning is completely unconstitutional and illegal to do. Towns can't do it. Public land use controls are also concerned about non-conforming uses. What's a non-conforming use? Something that's not allowed or permitted within a certain zone. So you may wonder about some of these houses you see when you travel through towns. Look at this beautiful, like a 1700s farmhouse. It's brownstone and everything, but it's like right on the road. How did they let that building be built on that road, right literally inches from the roadway? How did they let that occur? Well, the problem is that building, that house may have been there centuries before any road went in. So it's a pre-existing condition that doesn't comply with the current zoning ordinance. And since it's pre-existing, it's a pre-existing non-conforming use to the current zone. But because it's pre-existing, it's allowed to stay that way. It's grandfathered into existence. So you have a house that doesn't meet the current zoning requirements. It doesn't matter. The zoning requirements were probably put in place after that house was built. The house that you have can still function the way it does without having to comply with the current zoning ordinances. Because it's a pre-existing non-conforming use, it's allowed to continue in that manner. The municipal land use laws also are concerned about zoning boards. We talked about planning boards, but zoning boards and variances. What's a variance? A variance is when you seek special permission to do something that normally is not allowed to be done. So you buy a house and after a couple of years you realize, boy, it would be really nice to have a deck out back. So you go out and build the deck. Hang on. Remember, there's building codes, so you're going to first of all have to draw a diagram of where the building, where your house is, where the deck's going, where the side yards and front and back distances and all that stuff are located. So when you go down to the building department and show them your drawing, they can say, if that's the correct measurements, then you're not impending any, encroachment for setback lines or anything. So yeah, go ahead and build. You don't even need permits. Or you need permits, but you're not a problem with variances. Or it doesn't work with the current zoning ordinance. Therefore, in order to build that deck, you're going to have to apply to the zoning department and have a hearing. Then you would have to go to a hearing, present the positive and negative criteria of what it is that you're building, and the zoning board will determine whether to grant you a variance, meaning special permission to build that even though it doesn't comply with the zoning laws as it is, or they'll reject the application and say, no, you can't do that. Now, zoning boards are usually very understanding bodies of people. These are professionals and citizens from your town. You don't have to be a professional anything to be on the zoning board. As a realtor, I was asked by one of the townspeople, one of the town elected officials, that if I wanted to, there was an opening on the zoning board and I can partake or be part of the zoning board. I said, sure, why not? I'm community minded and I care about the town. So I said, okay. I was on the zoning board for 10 years. Then I was elected to public office. I gave up the zoning board stuff and then was on the planning board for 6 years. So your town relies on people like you, like me, who are just citizens. We're not professional anything. I'm a professional realtor. You could be an engineer, you could be a doctor, a lawyer, you could be a mechanic, you could be a carpenter for all I care, or a stock room clerk in a company. I don't care. It doesn't matter what you are. If you have a community interest, you can volunteer, make an application to the mayor and council. If they approve you, you're on the zoning board or planning board. It matters that you care about how your town is developed over time and have a heart for service. And I'm saying a heart for service because you're not getting paid for your job. It's a voluntary position. But if you care about your community and how it develops, take a position on the zoning board or planning board if you're so lucky to get elected or chosen to be on the board. By the way, after 10 years on the zoning board and 6 years on the planning board, I got to know pretty much every property owner in town. Did I use that to my advantage? Of course I did. What am I, stupid? But no, I wouldn't actively go after people just because I had a business relationship. That would be wrong. But people would come to me and said, hey, you're on the zoning board and you're a realtor, right? I got some questions. Hey, you want to sell your house? I'm the guy to talk to that. So your town operates planning and zoning boards and is concerned about master plans, development, zoning issues, variances, and the rest. Is there any questions about planning or zoning before we move on? Apparently not. Oh, maybe there is. And maybe some of you guys just hit the jackpot and you just aren't coming back to class. I don't know. I see a couple people with questions flying on. What chapter is this? It's chapter 10. It was chapter 9. Jackpot. Nice, Patrick. Ding, ding, ding. I don't have any. If I want to build a fire pit in my backyard, where do I go to make sure it fits all right? You could go to the building department, show them where you're going to put it, how big it's going to be, and they'll let you know whether it'll be permitted or not. Some towns have no outdoor fireplace requirements. Some don't care. So you should go to your building department and find out. You just go to the building department, your municipal borough hall, and talk to the gal behind the desk. She'll let you know right away. When does a lawyer come into this? Usually when there's a difficult decision to be made. You may need the influence of a lawyer to argue your zoning request or development request to the planning board. Excuse me. I heard many cases at the zoning board where people brought lawyers in to argue their cases. How are regulations enforced? Through the planning board and the building department, Charles. Good question, by the way. How are regulations for subdivisions enforced? Through the planning board. All permits, all permissions to build development, subdivisions, etc., must go through the town's planning board. And you're going to have a public hearing, just like a zoning application, to get permission to build or not. Knowing what the master plan says will help that subdivider know if his project will be accepted or not, Because if it's in compliance with the master plan regarding future development, the town will say, yeah, we want that. But if it's not, they're going to say, no, we're not looking for that kind of project. So your planning board is where to go. Can you make an example for zoning variance? Yeah, the deck was the example I used. Was there anybody else with a question? Not seeing any? Okay, let's move on. So, under public land use control or subdivision regulations, that's through the planning board. Building codes. The building department wants to make sure that when you're doing something on your property, that you're doing it right. Now, a year ago, I finished my kitchen renovation. It took me an entire year to do. I did it myself, believe it or not. I've been raised in the building trades and know my way around a hammer and a saw. So what I had done was several years ago, I had done a rehab on a property, a flip on a property in Montclair. It's a beautiful old stately home. And the kitchen in the property was only like 5 years old when the owner said, get this out of here, I can't stomach it. And it was a nice kitchen. 3/4 inch maple cabinetry, inch thick, beautiful forest green, what do you call it, the granite surfaces. So I kept it. Thinking one day I'm going to put it in another house and save myself some installation money. As it came about, my kitchen was well past its useful age, so I said it's time to do my own. So I used it in my house. I had to plan out new patterns for cabinets and counters and everything, and then I had to fit the granite surfaces, so I had to learn how to cut granite, how to polish it, how to seam it and all that stuff. And I got to pat myself on the back. I did a fairly good job for a novice, and it turned out pretty good. But in order to do this project, before I could even start project number one of ripping up the old kitchen, I had to go down to the building department and show them what I was going to do. I had to draw a diagram of the kitchen, where all the wiring was going to go, where the plumbing was going to go. There was a structural change I was making. I was taking a wall out between the dining room and living room and the kitchen to open it up for an open floor plan. So I had to show where the jack and king studs were going, what kind of header was going in the ceiling and all that stuff. They looked it over and said, good, you need a permit for structure, you need a permit for electrical, and you need a permit for plumbing. So I went and I paid for the permits and then got to work. First thing that I got done was the structural modification of the new open wall system. So when they came to inspect, he looked at it and said, okay, approved. So now I could sheetrock and insulate and get all that done, but I still had electrical issues to do. So I had to rewire the entire kitchen. And let me tell you, before I did the kitchen renovation, we had like 3 outlets in the entire kitchen. So if my wife was using the electric crock pot and the toaster was on, if someone hooked the microwave, boom, the whole house went black. Now I've got 9 outlets in the kitchen. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 outlets in the kitchen. Plus, I don't have gas on my street, so I put a brand new high-grade electric stove with a dedicated circuit and circuit breaker just for that. I also put in a baseboard heating unit, air-fired off the hot water line, that blew hot air across the floor, which is really a nice item. And I also had to rewire for the other outlets and the ceiling lights. I had to redo them all. So I had to get a permit for that. And when I did all the wiring, they came to inspect and check. Yep, that's good. They also had to remove the old line for the ice maker of the old machine. It was bad. It was starting to leak. So I had to replace that. I had to move it over 5 feet. Got the permit closed out. So in essence, the building department not only required me to file permits to do the job, they also came to inspect to make sure that what I did was according to the building codes, so that I don't wind up killing myself, making a cup of coffee in the morning. So all these building codes and regulations aren't there to piss people off. It's there to make sure that when you do a job, that you're going to be safe living in that environment. Any questions about zoning ordinances or building codes or anything like that? Because we're about to switch gears here. Can I hire you to do my renovation? No, 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 Ayana. No, after the kitchen, I swore to myself that's the last reno I'm ever doing. Ever. In fact, in the next 2 weeks, I got the windows guy coming and he's going to replace all my windows. I would have done it, but I'm getting to that point in my life where I just don't have that, ability to do all those windows at once. I'm talking about 20 windows in a house. And besides, they're going to come and do it in one day, the entire house. So I'm going to leave it to them, and I'll pay the extra to have it done that way. But thank you for asking, but no, I'm not. It was that bad, Ayana. Yes, it was. If you don't get a permit for a basement and it's already completed, can you be fined or just get it now? They could ask you, Richard, to fill in the basement if you never got permits and it doesn't comply with the ordinances. In other words, when they come, if you want to sell your house, the building department is going to come over and inspect your property and make sure it complies with the certificate of occupancy requirements. And if they notice that, hey, the records show that you don't have a basement, how did you have a basement here? I put one in a couple of years ago. Well, you never got permits to do it, so no, you can't sell your house. What? They may even ask you to dig up and do the entire foundation so they can inspect the footings. This is real serious stuff here, guys, and I'm not kidding. This stuff happens. So it's always important to get permits before you take on a job. What if you are not doing a structural change or any type of electrical or plumbing, just renovating the kitchen? Do you need if you're just doing cabinet replacements like cosmetic stuff, you don't need permits. But if you're doing structural, electrical, or plumbing, you do. I want to start flipping. Guys, I did my last flip a year and a half ago. I don't do them anymore. I just to that point in my life where I just don't want to take on. As I said at the beginning of class, every day I'm semi-retired. I'm kind of pulling back out of the industry and working so hard. I'm 63. I deserve to start taking it easy and enjoy, my mature years. Just did my kitchen. Don't think I got permits. Yikes. I'm not going to say anything, Patrick. You need a permit for windows? No, it's not structural unless you're changing locations. Integrity, complete home improvement. Okay, let's stop advertising. Stop. Oh, you found $300. Nice, Madeline. Good for you. This bottle of scotch is only $69. Anyway, do you need permits to pull for a Silver's bar in the basement? What? Guys, now you're getting off track here. All right, let's stop. Hang on. I'm going to moderate here. All right. You've done 35 flips, Nicholas. Good for you. God, that's many more than I did. All right. Here we got to get back to school, guys. So good stories, good questions, but let's move on. We're going to change topics now. We're done talking about zoning, building permits, police powers. Done with that. Now we're going to talk about environmental issues. Now, environmental issues are everywhere. Let me tell you just a little story before we start. I grew up here in Bergen County, born and raised. I went to college in Boston, stayed there for 15 years. Bought a house on the North Shore in Ipswich, Massachusetts. Loved it up there. Condominium. But the economy in the late 80s wasn't great. The bank I was working for had problems. I called up a friend back here in Jersey and said, hey, I need something to do. I don't want to keep wondering if I have a job tomorrow. What do you got going? Hey, I got a construction foreman's job for you in the city if you want. So I took a job as a project manager for a construction firm in Manhattan for several years. Nice job, good pay, but man, did it burn me out. But anyway, I recall back in the 70s, after high school, and when I come home from college, once in a while I'd go into the city and, see a Yankee game or a Knicks game or something. But every time I got out of my little enclave of the town I lived in, I would come down either through the turnpike and go in the tunnels that way, or take a bus down to the GW and go across and hop a subway. And in the 70s, the Hackensack River and the Meadowlands were dark chocolate colored. It was really gross. The Hudson River was not exactly milk chocolate, but it was dark chocolate as well, and it was polluted beyond belief. The skies were polluted. When you looked up in the sky, you didn't see blue like you do today. Oh, it's beautiful outside. What you see is a layer of brown and red haze just hanging over everything. The air and the water quality of the area here in New Jersey, New York was terrible. I mean, it was really, really bad. And there was one instance I recall. After college, 1980, I graduated, came back to visit mom and dad in New Jersey. And as I came down, I made a side trip down to the shore for a couple of days before I went back and saw them. Saw some buddies, did more than enough drinking for the weekend. But I recall when I drove down the New Jersey Turnpike in the Newark area, that the Meadowlands was so gross and disgusting. In fact, there was an area where the water was on fire. I mean, there were so many chemical dumps in that waterway. It was disgusting. And if you doubt me, guys, talk to anybody you know who was alive and lived here in the 70s. It was that bad. The 70s, 1970, we had the first Earth Day. And then in 76, municipal land use laws, the Clean Water Bill, the Clean Air Bill came out from Congress. And all of a sudden, in the next 10 to 15 years, things started to change. And today, I mean, look at the sky. It's robin's egg blue out there. It's gorgeous. I actually fished in the Hackensack River last fall and caught stripers. Yeah, they're running in the Hackensack River. If you told me that 30, 40 years ago, I would have said, you're a liar. There's no way they could live in there. Now they are. Things have changed. You can take tours of the Meadowlands. The Riverkeeper sponsors boat tours, kayaking. You can fish down there. You can take walking path tours with the Audubon Society. It's a beautiful place to relax for a day or two. Things have dramatically changed because of environmental laws. And high time it was in the 70s that we got around to getting that done. If not, who knows where we'd be today. But the fact is, there's continual issues with our land, our air, and our water that we have to be concerned about. And New Jersey recognizes the need to balance those needs along with development. Guys, we're the most densely populated state in the nation. There's 9 million people that live in little old New Jersey. Now, because of these environmental laws that are coming about, we had to learn how to balance development with environmental concerns. Besides that, there was vital resources we had to protect: drinking water supplies, open spaces, parks, national parks, campgrounds, all kinds of things that people enjoy for weekend getaways and such that have to be taken care of and protected. The animal life, the vegetable life that exists in New Jersey is extremely varied, and it's important we preserve these things. So all these environmental concerns had to be taken care of through laws. So many laws were enacted, and we're going to talk later in our experiences of learning about environmental laws that are enacted to protect the public these days. And we're going to talk about that today at the end of the chapter. But right now, we're going to change our focus and start the introduction, start talking about environmental issues when it comes to housing, because these are things that we have to know about. So first of all, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, puts out a booklet called the Healthy Home Action. What's that, Tim? Well, first of all, on page 134 on your 14th edition hardcover Essentials New Jersey Real Estate textbook, On the top of the page is a link that you can copy and paste and get in English, or there's another link for a Spanish version of the Healthy Home Action Pamphlet. I suggest you download it and read it. It's very informative and goes into very simple terminology of what kind of things can affect homeowners. It's in plain English and in plain Spanish. There's no highfalutin language in there. And it talks about mold, radon, carbon monoxide, allergies, secondhand smoke, and volatile organic compounds, or VOCs. However, that's just an introductory booklet. As real estate professionals, you guys have to be more adept at identifying and explaining about certain hazardous substances in residential properties. Now, we're going to go through a substantial list here, but before I do, does anybody have any questions about what we're talking about, or things about environmental issues that you want to we should be concerned about, that you want to make it known? Anybody at all? Excuse me. And good. I'm not seeing any comments or suggestions or questions, so then let's move on. So these hazardous substances, let's go through them. The first one, asbestos. Asbestos. Asbestos is a naturally occurring mineral in the Earth's crust. It's mined and used in many, many different applications. Asbestos is a fibrous material that can be shaped and molded and used in many different applications, chief of which might be building products. In fact, car brakes are often made out of asbestos. Linoleum is made from asbestos. Some siding materials made from asbestos, roofing compounds can be made from asbestos. There's many different applications for the use of asbestos, but not all of them are dangerous. Linoleum is a product that has been termed safe, but it's made from asbestos, Tim. How can it be safe? Because asbestos in the form of linoleum is not what they call friable. Friable. There's only a few variances of asbestos use that are friable, and the chief concern that most residential property owners have is the old pipe wrap insulation on the heating lines in your house, usually down in the basement. And if you go into older homes, there's still a good chance you may find and see, it looks like paper mache wrapped around pipes. That, my friends, is not paper mache. It's asbestos. And it is friable, meaning when it dries out and ages, it starts to flake and turn to dust and gets in the air. Asbestos mineral fibers, when you breathe them in, are like fiberglass fibers. They get into your air sacs in your lungs and they puncture the air sacs, and all of a sudden you can't breathe. Mesothelioma or asbestosis is the disease that asbestos causes when it gets in your lungs. So it's the white paper mache looking pipe wrap primarily in houses that cause that kind of problem. Therefore, you can no longer use. In fact, in 1978, asbestos was outlawed in the use of in residential properties, except for products that are non-friable in nature. So today, when we go out selling houses and someone says, hey, I want to sell my house, one of the first questions I have for someone who wants to sell is, can we take a tour of your house? And the first place I always go is the basement. I said, I want to start in the basement and work up to the ceiling and the rafters. So we'll start in the basement. I'm looking for water leaks or infiltration, the smell of mustiness for like mold issues and stuff. And I always say, where's your heating plant? What kind of heating source? Is it oil, gas, whatever? And look, what's that around the pipes? Is that paper mache? Oh, I don't know what that is. I'm going to say, well, by the way, I'm pretty sure it may be asbestos. But what we don't know if it really is or not, and I don't want to be the tester of this, so we should call someone in to test that. And if it's deemed to be asbestos, the homeowner is required to have it removed, and it's kind of expensive to have done. It's not cheap. But once it's removed, the asbestos company gives a certificate saying it was remediated successfully and according to law, so you have a certificate proving that. So asbestos in homes can be extremely toxic to the people living there if it is a friable compound. And that old pipe wrap insulation is the one that's targeted as the most friable and most dangerous in residential housing. Now, asbestos is not outlawed in commercial buildings. What? Yeah, being very serious. Schools today are being constantly found to have asbestos in them. And they have to shut schools down and close them so they can remove all asbestos so kids don't get asbestosis or mesothelioma. Very expensive proposition. So understand, guys, we have two eyes, use them. Look, if you look in the basement around the heating plant, if you see paper mache looking pipe wrap, most likely that's going to be asbestos. And if the homeowner doesn't remediate it, then the buyer's going to have to pay for it, and they're going to ask the seller for a discount on the price of the house to pay for the remediation of the asbestos. So tell your home seller to take care of it before the house goes to market, because then it could be a problem. Any questions on asbestos before I move on? I tried to explain that asbestos I can. Oh, I had to say it. I'm sorry, I had to say that. Anybody have any questions? Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'm here weekly, guys. Tip your waitresses. Excuse me. All right, but anybody have any questions about this? Can asbestos be used in paint? Boy, Arson, that's a good question. I have no idea. I'm not a chemist. I would have no idea. I know asbestos is used as fireproofing material in commercial applications. So I don't know if it could be used in paint, but you could talk to a chemist and find out. Do they have to remove, or can they encapsulate to sell? It must be removed, Rachel. What about outdoor shingles? The question is, are they friable? And if so, then they should be remediated. But if they're not, then they can stay. And you need to ask a professional about that. It used to be used in paint, not anymore. Asbestos, okay. I know lead is still used in paint. All right, anybody else? Does the agent have duty of confidentiality if the buyer asks about asbestos? Duty of confidentiality in what manner? If the buyer has a question about asbestos, I would be the agent saying, hey, Mr. Seller, is that asbestos there? My buyer wants to know. But it doesn't do anything. There's no requirement for confidentiality, but what it does is puts the onus of proof now on the seller to have it checked out and proven. If it is asbestos, then they got to remove it. If not, then there's no problem. It's well-known fact, almost every property older than 30 years has asbestos. Understood and agreed. Is it only a time of sale or purchase this matter comes into being a factor? Most of the time, yes, it does, Trinidad. But if you own a home, and if you're a responsible person, you could be looking for things like this. So if you're thinking of selling, you can head off the problem before the house even goes to market, and therefore it won't be a problem. Does the seller's agent have a duty of confidentiality? No. As far as asbestos, he must disclose if he knows it to be true. Trinidad, why? Why what? I'm sorry. What if a rental property has asbestos? As a landlord, can I rent it? If it's friable, not until you clean up the property, my friend. And I know there's a lot of landlords renting property with asbestos contamination in them that aren't fixing them. And if they get caught, they're in big trouble. When they find a home inspection, most likely they would. How would you know if it's friable? Well, if it's the pipe wrap insulation, it is. If it's any other product, it may or may not be. You can always call up an asbestos company and get their opinion about it. Can the buyer be willing to buy the property without the seller removing it or offering a credit, or does it have to be done? It's supposed to be done by the seller, but if the buyer promises to do it, the seller could give them credit at closing for the cost of the cleanup, yes. Must new owners, mostly minorities, don't know much who is to, I guess, advise to protect them? Well, Trinidad, I don't want to generalize anybody or anything here. But all tenants have a right to a safe, habitable environment, not just people who are not minorities. Everybody has the right to a safe, habitable environment. And I don't know how to approach you regarding a response to that. Moving on. I know, Dale. All right. I don't want to waste too much more time here, guys. We got a whole bunch more stuff to cover. All right. So I'm going to moderate. Sorry, guys. If you had other questions, save for later. We'll talk about it. Number 2, lead-based paint or lead hazards in a home. Boy, it's not a day goes by now you don't hear about the Newark school system's water supply now has been all cleaned up, right? Or has it? It turns out it wasn't lead paint, it was lead pipes that were contaminating the water supply going to the schools. They had to replace all these water lines going to all schools to give children safe drinking water. But that's not the real concern we're talking about. What we're talking about is any lead-based paint hazard in the house, most likely. So lead paint was outlawed in 1978 by the federal government. And any house built from 1978 till the present any residential house, does not contain lead paint. But any house built before 1978 probably has lead paint in it, and maybe still does. I live in a house that was built in 1957. It's as old as I am. And the fact is, when we bought it, I had some questions about some of the trim work in that house. And yeah, sure enough, when I did the exploration, I found lead paint. Did I hire the company to come in and remediate it at a very expensive rate? No, I didn't. I put on a HEPA filtered mask and a rubber sweatsuit, and I went in and I removed all that lead paint, all the trim work, everything down to took out drywall, trim work, everything. Got rid of it. Don't ask me how I got rid of it. I don't want to tell you. We're not going to go there. But it's gone. No more lead problems in the house. But if the house had been well kept and updated as normal, then every 10 years or so, the house would have gotten a new paint treatment. Some people change colors and update their houses every so often. And if they do, since 1978, which was like, what, 30-something years ago, then chances are the lead paint has been encapsulated under the current new paint and really doesn't pose a problem. Because it's not just lead paint that is the problem. It's what happens when lead paint dries out and flakes and chips and falls to the floor that the problems start. So back in the 1960s, school administrators in the city were concerned about their inner city youth having learning disabilities, behavioral issues, and it was mostly from lower and moderate income earner home environments. So they decided, let's go study the kids in their houses and their living environments to find out if they're getting lead from there or is it from the school. So they did a school inspection. If they found something, they got rid of it. Then they go to the houses where these children live and observe how kids behave. Now, I'm a parent. If you've been a parent, you know that whenever your little child is playing and they touch something, where do their hands go? Right, in their mouths. Everything they touch, they taste. Here's the thing. In these lower income areas where these children lived, the sashes and the windows obviously were made from wood and painted with lead paint. Over time, when wood rubs against wood in the sash, the paint starts to, because of friction, chip and flake and falls to the ground. When children play and touch these chips, they put them in their mouths. Here's the most insidious part about the whole thing. Because lead is sweet to the taste, the children kept going back for more and more and more. And then this lead started to build up on their brain stems and between their brain synapses, and they had learning problems, behavioral issues. Some childhood leukemias and diseases may be linked to it. There's all kinds of health issues and mental health issues stemming from lead paint ingestion. And it was finally determined, and the federal government acted on it in the 70s to outlaw lead paint in the construction of residential property. Today, houses, and a good majority of them out there, were built before 1978. So you know that there's a good potential of lead paint in almost all those houses. Now, if it's been well kept and encapsulated under a layer or two of new paint, then it's not an issue. But if it hasn't, then a lead paint remediation must take place. And that, my friends, is also a very expensive proposition to remove. The EPA puts out a booklet, Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home. And you can get, I believe, is a link in here as well? I don't know if the link to that one is in here. No, probably not. But your brokers, the ones who you're going to go work for, will have the link for you to download this pamphlet to give all your prospective home buyers. And you should. So they know if there's a danger from the house that they're going to buy or not, and what to look for when doing the home inspection. Any questions about lead paint? Not seeing any, Len, let's move on. Radon is next on our agenda. Radon. What's radon? Radon is a naturally occurring gas in the environment. Radon is the gas that is a residual compound left when radioactive particles break down in rock. Radioactive particles like uranium and things like that are stored in rock. Where there's more rock, there's more radioactive particles, therefore more radon gas. Where there's less rock, obviously less radon gas. And if you turn to page 139 in your 14th edition textbook, it gives you a radon potential map. And if you look, it says, look down by the Jersey Shore, very light colored sandy soil has little rock, therefore very low radon potential. But if you look upwards to western New Jersey, where there's lots of dark shaded areas where there's a lot of rock in the soil, you have a much higher potential for radon. So I live in Oakland, New Jersey at the foothills of the Ramapo Mountains. Figuring there was rock in the soil, I had a radon test done when I bought the house, and it came out 1.5 picocuries. Now, picocuries are the measuring amounts of gas, parts per million, things like that. The New Jersey Environmental Protection Agency says 4.0 picocuries or higher is a toxic exposure, and you must put in a remediation system in your house, which costs about $2,500, not a big deal. But if it's lower than that, then you don't have to put a system in. So when my son, turned 18, he decided to commandeer the media room in the basement at his new basement, game room. There goes the man cave. So he did. But I figured if he's going to live in the basement, I better have it checked again for radon. So you can go down to your hardware store and get radon test kits. They're little canisters. Pay about $25 for them. The directions are on. What you do is you unseal the canister, put it on a shelf 4 feet above the ground level in the basement, shut the basement up for 24 to 48 hours. And then after that time, you go down, seal the canister up, send it off in the pre-stamped, prepaid mailing envelope to a testing corporation. 2 to 3 weeks later, you get the results. I got my results, 1.85 picocuries, far below the necessary 4.0 or higher to require a remediation system. So I knew my child's brain was not being affected by radon. It's just that his brain was mush anyway because he was a teenager. But anyway, remediation of radon is not expensive. They put a ducted fan system in and carry the vapors up through and above the ridge line on your house, and it dissipates into the atmosphere up high. Not a problem. But be on the lookout, guys, because any home with a basement has a potential for radon. Now, on page 138 in your 14th edition textbook is the lead paint disclosure form that is required that realtors, us, have sellers and buyers or landlords and tenants fill out on every sale of residential property or every rental of a residential property, so that if the owner knows or has reports about lead paint, they have to disclose it to the tenant. The landlord would sign, the tenant would sign, the realtor signs, and you must keep a copy of this with your paperwork for no less than 6 years. Your broker is responsible to keep those records. So, radon, lead paint, asbestos. Any questions? Not seeing any? Let's move on then. Urea formaldehyde. What the hell is that? Well, formaldehyde, I think you know what the formaldehyde is. Formaldehyde is embalming fluid. It's beautiful. It's wonderful for preserving dead tissue, but it's toxic to living tissue. Formaldehyde, urea formaldehyde, was used as an insulation product in the 1970s. What? Yeah. Urea formaldehyde was used as insulating products in the 70s, and many houses were built with urea formaldehyde insulation in them. And in 1982, the Consumer Product Safety Commission banned the use of urea formaldehyde insulation and was required that all those homes be remediated of their formaldehyde insulation. Did they get every house? I can't say they did. I don't know. I don't think you can even ask them for a final number if they got them all. So the thing is, if a house is on the market that's built in the 70s, one of the questions you want to ask is, what kind of insulation was used in the house? If they don't know, then you may want to have your home inspector do a test on the insulation to find out. And if it's revealed that it's urea formaldehyde, then that seller's got a big problem, because you're not going to want to buy a house living in a bubble of tissue preservative. No, I don't think so. Urea formaldehyde, bad. Mold, our next topic, mold. Boy, mold is an insidious killer. Or is it? Is it overblown, this whole mold hype, or what? Well, first of all, what's mold? Mold is a life form. It spreads via asexual reproduction. They send out little microscopic spores. And when that spore settles in a dark, damp environment, it replicates over and over and over again until a colony of mold starts to grow. Some of you guys eat mold. What? No, not me. I wouldn't. Oh, yeah. Do you like blue cheese dressing with your hot wings? What do you think the blue is in blue cheese? It's mold. You like Swiss cheese? How do you think Swiss cheese gets those little bubbles inside of it? By mold particles giving us carbon dioxide gas that forms those little balls. Oh, whoa. In fact, some guy way back when was sitting down having a piece of bread for breakfast and it had mold on it. You looked at it and go like, ew. And then he went, And then he developed penicillin from the mold on his bread. So some molds are actually beneficial and helpful to humans. There are, however, some categories of mold that can kill you. So when do I know when mold is bad? Well, first of all, if it's a black mold, the chances are it's not good for you. Now, as I said, mold replicates by sending out spores and settles in dark, damp atmospheres and replicates. Your lungs are dark and damp. You breathe in a mold spore, it can start replicating and replicating and replicating, and pretty soon you can't breathe and you die. Mold can be an insidious killer because you can't even see it when you breathe it in. It's microscopic, it's tiny. If you get sick from mold, it takes a very strong antibiotic and probably a good intensive care stay to cure you of that problem. Some people don't survive it. Mold is terrible stuff. So when doing renovations or modifications to a house, if you discover mold, you need to get rid of it. And you just can't go in there and say, hey, I can take care of it and get rid of it. No, you got to wear high efficiency particle absorption masks and suits and get rid of it all and apply chemicals to kill all the spores. And there's all kinds of steps you got to go through to kill mold. But mold is one of those things now that homeowners and sellers are concerned about, because if it's discovered that mold is in a property, buyers are pretty much not going to want to buy the property unless the mold has been remediated. And that can be expensive to do. So whenever a house has moisture in it, there's a good chance mold may be present. So one of the things I always ask sellers is, do you have any water leak issues anywhere in the house? No, have nothing. Well, I got to ask a question, because when we were upstairs in the bedroom, I noticed there was a little brown stain on the paint up in the corner of the room next to the closet. Did you have a leak in your roof? Yeah, but that was a couple years ago. We sealed that up. It's all cured. Okay. So you obviously then took apart the wall underneath the roof, that leak, and took out all the insulation and chemically treated all the wood before you put new insulation, sealed it back up. Yes? No. Why would I do that? Because even just a little bit of water getting in your house can cause an environment to become moist. And if that occurs and it's dark behind that wall, if there's any mold spores in the house, they're going to find that and start replicating. You may have a mold problem. You don't even know about it. Another way to find out if there's mold in the house is to go into the basement of a house. Why? Because that's where cold air settles. Cold air is cold because of the moisture content it has in it. And it's heavier than normal air, so it sinks to the bottom level of the house. That's why when you go in people's houses, they have dehumidifiers running in the basement to get all that moisture out of the air. If not, and you go down the basement, you smell that musty, moldy smell. Well, that's mold, and you got a problem. So mold is a very serious issue, and it doesn't select any kind of categories. It's non-discriminatory. It goes after every place that's dark and damp. Any questions about mold? Sorry to backtrack. In the book, it says that according to New Jersey Real Estate Commission, you have a duty to keep radon testing results confidential until there is a contract of sale entered into unless written authorization of seller. Yes, that's correct. Why? Why publicize, hey, this property has a radon problem? There's no reason to do that. But if a buyer shows interest, hey, have you ever had your house tested for radon? Yeah, we had a problem, but we had it remediated, and here's the paperwork to prove it. Or we had a problem, we haven't fixed it, so just so you know, the house has an inspection problem. Now that the buyer asking you told, any future buyer must be told the same information. So yes, you are correct. Thank you again. You read the book. Thank you. Appreciate that. Is it true that all new residential construction must have radon fans installed? Radon fans? Not that I'm aware of, Peter. However, it would not surprise me if some municipalities had that requirement. I don't know that it's part of the UCC in Trenton, the Uniform Construction Code. I'm not up on those codes as much as maybe I should have been, but now that I'm kind of retired, I really don't care. I'll pay someone else to find out about it for me. All right. Nicholas, did you have a question? Maybe not. Okay, let's moderate and move on then. Carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide, one of the leading causes of deaths in a home, believe it or not. I'm telling you guys, it's not a summer that goes by that I don't hear about 3 children dying from carbon monoxide exposure, 2 adults dying from carbon monoxide exposure. And typically when they tell you the reason, you just go, what are they thinking? Well, then you hear, well, you know, that alarm was chirping all the time, so we just took the battery out. What? And that's why replaceable battery units are no longer allowed to be used in residential properties. Because people take the batteries out instead of changing them. It's too much of a hassle. I can't remember when I'm supposed to change it or not. And I don't like the sound of it when it goes off. Carbon monoxide is a deadly killer. It again is a tasteless, odorless, colorless gas, heavier than air, and settles in the lower parts of a house, the basement most likely, or the first floor if there's no basement. Carbon monoxide gets into your lungs and replaces the oxygen in your lungs. So when your blood vessels go through your lungs and exchange the old worn out oxygen, carbon dioxide, it's pulling in carbon monoxide instead of oxygen, and you die from asphyxiation. You don't even know you're dying because once you breathe in carbon monoxide, you start to get a little tired and a little fuzzy headed, so you lay down and go to sleep, and then you never wake up. Terrible, terrible way to go. So nowadays, all residential properties that are for sale or rent must have 10-year sealed battery compartment carbon monoxide and smoke detectors in them. Under new construction law, all carbon monoxide and smoke detectors must be hardwired into the building's electrical grid with battery backups, the 10-year sealed battery compartments, and be series wired throughout the entire structure. Meaning, if a unit goes off in the basement, every unit in the building goes off. So everybody gets the warning at the same time. In retrofitting, you just have to put them one on every floor and one no less than 10 feet away from a bedroom unit. And depending on how many bedrooms and where they are, you may have to put multiple units in. But carbon monoxide detectors save thousands and thousands of lives every year. And for people not to be compliant with the carbon monoxide detector requirements is just beyond me. Why would they not spend $50 for a new indicator that you can't tamper with that could save your life? And it's not even $50 now. You can get them for like 25, 30 bucks. But whenever you sell a house now in New Jersey or rent a residential structure to a tenant, you must have a code enforcement official do an inspection for the new updated 10-year sealed battery compartment, carbon monoxide and smoke detectors, and working portable fire extinguishers in those residences. It's a requirement by law, and you can't transfer ownership or rent of residential property until you have that permission from the building department or fire marshal. Any questions about carbon monoxide? Is carbon monoxide present in smoke when you have a fire burning in a wood stove? Yes, Charles, it's also a byproduct of any biofuel being burnt. Gas, oil, things like that, wood, coal. It is a byproduct of any burning of fossil fuels. And the problem usually comes in when people don't clean their flue pipes out. If the gas can't escape from the flue pipe into the atmosphere, it backs up into the basement, and that's when carbon monoxide primarily builds up and affects people. Also, I'm glad you brought that point up. Thank you for bringing that up. Also, when we're talking about mold, I got to bring you back there for a second. If you live in a residential structure that has forced hot air heat or central air conditioning that's ducted, my question to you is, when's the last time you had your ductworks swept out and cleaned? What are you talking about, Jensen? Well, your ductwork, where your forced hot air circulates and your air conditioning circulates through, when it's not in use, is dark and damp. But I change the filters on my filter every couple months. Not good enough. Guys, these micron filters aren't small enough to sometimes stop all those spores. And if it gets in your air conditioning system and settles in a corner, it starts to replicate and replicate and replicate. So if you're sitting in your basement, breathing that fresh air coming in from your air duct, are you also breathing in mold spores? How often have you had your ductwork cleaned, and have you ever had it cleaned? It's recommended you should do it every 3 to 5 years. What? I have never had it done. Well, it's time to have it done, guys. And I'm being very serious. Just like carbon monoxide, you have to maintain your property. And if you have a backup, whether because of carbon monoxide or a clogged chimney, or you have mold growing in your ductwork, it's your fault, nobody else's. So you got to be proactive and take the proper steps and maintain your properties accordingly for mold and carbon monoxide. I hope I answered your question, Charles, but you spurred me on to something bigger and better than that, so I appreciate the question. Just finished new construction. It was, oh, okay, for the COs, right. Yes, okay, good. Anybody else with a question before I continue to move on? We will be taking a break in another 15, 20 minutes, guys, so your patience will be rewarded. Looks like another question, so I'll hang on. I'm not trying to be off topic, but how is EMF? Okay, hang on, Sean. We haven't even gotten there yet. You notice it's the next category to be discussed. So if you just hang on, Sean, I'll probably answer your question before I even read it. So guys, please, I know you're anticipatory of getting the day over, but don't force us into topics that aren't being discussed yet. Just wait and we'll discuss it, I promise. All right, I'm going to moderate here and get back to discussing. So by the way, look, next discussion topics is electromagnetic fields. How about that, Sean? So let's talk about electromagnetic fields, EMFs. Well, if I were to ask my wife, what does an EMF mean? She'll tell me, oh, I see that when they have those ghost shows. Some guy's walking around with an EMF field detector, and if it goes off, that means there's a ghost present. Oh, jeez, really? I'm not a ghost hunter. I don't know anything about these things. But apparently ghosts use EMFs to manifest themselves. Who knew? But now that we're talking in the realm of reality, electromagnetism, electromagnetic fields. Okay, now, excuse me for a few minutes while I use my teaching ability to teach you a little bit about electromagnetic fields. So behind me is a wall. Through that wall, excuse me, are power lines. There's an outlet down here, goes up, probably goes across to a receptacle over there. That's the on and off switch. And there's lights overhead that go to that light switch. So here's what happens. When that light switch is off, electrons are not moving. And because electrons are not moving, there's no magnetic fields being generated. But if I turn the switch on, electrons flow. And whenever electrons flow, it creates a magnetic field around that flow. And I know I'm sounding too scientific for some of this, so just bear with me for a minute, guys. Now, electromagnetism is symbiotic upon itself, meaning because electron flows, it generates magnetism. That means whenever a magnetic field is generated, it causes electrons to flow. Literally, one is the effect of the other. So, is this dangerous, this electromagnetic field caused by the movement of electrons? I had a house for sale in South Clifton, around the Nutley border. And if you're familiar with that area, there's a big high tension power line that goes east to west through the Nutley Clifton border. And this house happened to be right in front of one of those towers. And I was just doing my open houses on Sunday. People would pull up to the front of the house, look at the house, and drive on. Not too many people stopped to take a look at the house because they saw that big power line behind the house and said, "Ooh, not me. I don't want to glow at night." But one day on a Sunday, as I was doing the open house, car comes up to the front and stops. Couple gets out and comes up to the front door, rings the bell, and, "Hi, my name's Tim Jensen with ABC Real Estate. How can I help you? We're here to see the open house. Come right in." And started to talk. After about 40 minutes, the wife looks at me and she says, "Are there any offers on the house?" I said, "No, not at this moment. We just put the house on the market a couple of weeks ago." She says, "My husband and I would like to put in a full price offer. We need to get a house quickly. Is it possible to close within 60 days? It's like, wow, yeah, well, let's go on the back deck and we'll talk. I did that for a reason. I sat them next to the house and I sat further away from them. And I said, "Now, as we're drawing up this offer, is there anything about this property that would cause you concern about safety or issues regarding public health before we go ahead and wait?" "Oh, you're funny, Tim." I was like, "What?" She goes, "I know what you're doing." I go, "What?" She goes, I know I'm pointing to that tower. I have to make it blatantly obvious that everybody who comes here says no because of that. I'm surprised that that doesn't seem to be a problem for you." She goes, "It's not a problem for us." I said, "That's cool. Can I ask why?" She says, "My husband and I are scientists." "Oh." "We're being transferred down from Schenectady to new jobs at Roche Chemical, which is literally a mile away. So, and they found this house perfect for them." I said, "That's tremendous. So what do you mean? You know that electromagnetic fields aren't?" She goes, "According to scientific study, there's no conclusive evidence that electromagnetic fields are harmful to humans." Is that right? I said, "You got to convince me." She goes, "Okay, tell you what. We're going to have the home inspected. And when we do, we're going to call up the power company and they'll come and do a free EMF reading on the property. If you have a house near a high tension power line, you can call up, is it PSE&G, Central Jersey Light, or Rockland, whoever it is, your service provider. They'll come and do a free EMF scan of your property." So sure enough, on the day of inspection, PSE&G shows up. Guy steps out with this little handheld meter, tells me who he is, and the meter's an electromagnetic field detector. He goes, "I'm going to take a reading at the exterior corner of the house, of each corner. I'm going to take a reading at the exterior corners of the property of the house as well. And then we'll go in the kitchen, sit down, we'll talk." I said, "Great." So he goes around the house, takes his measurements. Then he goes to every corner of the property, does his measurements. And I certainly watched him when he went to the backyard and he took measurements way back there by the tower. And then we went and sat in the kitchen. He goes, "Boy, Tim, you know what? My coffee got a little cold. Can you put it in the microwave and heat it?" So I put in the nuker, put it on for a minute. And as soon as I hit the start button, his EMF detector goes beep. I said, "What was that?" He goes, "My EMF detector just pinned to maximum." I go, "How come?" "Because you're standing in front of a microwave. A microwave has a magnetron field generator in it, and it gives off a very high degree of electromagnetic fields." His point was, I'm getting exposed to more EMF standing in front of a microwave heating a cup of coffee than I am living under high tension power lines. Blew me away. I said, "That's a pretty good trick, but I bet there's something about a microwave that does it." He goes, "No, no, no. Go over and turn the TV set on." Now, this was years ago, before flat panel TVs. We had those old 7,000-pound TVs. You know what I'm talking about, those cathode ray tubes. Well, a cathode ray tube, you know, the TVs that were big and heavy, a cathode ray tube monitor is an electron gun. That's all it is. It shoots electrons into a diffuser and mirror separators that form patterns on the screen. Not every electron stops. So I went over, I pulled on the knob, and the old color TV kicked on, and beep, his EMF indicator pins again. You're getting more exposure sitting in front of a cathode ray tube TV from EMFs than you are living under these high tension power lines. Boy, I got to tell you, what a dramatic demonstration. It certainly brought home to me the fact that these not radio towers, but these power line towers are not the health hazard most people think they are. There is no scientific evidence conclusively stating that EMFs are harmful to humans. What they have found out is that electromagnetic fields can sometimes influence brainwave patterns and your feelings. Your senses may be augmented in a slight way, but there's no actual harm to the human because of that. That's scientific evidence indicates. So when it comes to a question, is this a harmful thing in a house? I'm not the final authority here. I'm just saying, according to science, electromagnetic fields are not proven to be hazardous to human health. Anybody want to discuss that? Have a question about it? Did I answer your question regarding EMFs there, Sean? But EMFs have been shown to cause cancer in animals, correct? I'm not aware of that. But coffee is proved to cause cancer in animals too at very high dosages. So who's to say what really causes cancer? So I'm drinking cancer right now out of a coffee cup. I mean, if I drank 100 cups a day, maybe, but I can't drink that much coffee. Will EMFs be on the state test? Possibly. So is beef very carcinogenic? Boy, whoa, Sean. I'm not an employee of the FDA. I would have no idea about that. Okay, I'm not really seeing any other question I really want to care to answer, but I'm gonna move on. I do appreciate the questions, though, guys. It's just that I want to make sure we're staying focused and getting this stuff done. Asbestos, lead paint, radon, urea formaldehyde, mold, carbon monoxide, electromagnetic fields. What else is going to kill me, Tim? Groundwater contamination. Oh boy. Groundwater contamination could possibly be the biggest environmental threat that is quite possibly underrated. What do you mean? I live in Oakland, New Jersey. To the west of me, just to the southwest of me, is a town called Pompton Lakes. It's a nice, bucolic little town, much like Oakland. Problem is, back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, they had a chemical plant there by the name of DuPont. And in this chemical plant, DuPont manufactured detonators, high explosive compounds, and all kinds of toxic chemicals were used. Well, back in the 50s and 60s, whenever you had an excess of something or you wanted to get rid of something, you just dumped it down the sewer. Now, hang on. I remember watching my old man change the oil on the Ford and taking the old waste oil and just dumping it down the sewer. I remember that from the 60s. There was an article in 1963, and you can check me if you guys are fact checkers. Look up Popular Mechanics 1963. It showed you how to properly dispose of waste motor oil from your car. It said, dig a hole in the ground, fill it up with rocks, and excuse me, and pour all the waste oil down over those rocks, and then cover it up. Within days, all that oil would be gone. It's a miracle. It's all gone. So, as the underground water table is where all this stuff went. So in Pompton Lakes, all of that waste material went right down into the water table underground and got into the Pompton Lake. About 2.5 years ago, Pompton Lakes finally finished like a 3-year EPA cleanup of one section of Pompton Lake, and I think it cost something like $10 million to do. And that was only one little section of the lake. If you live in Pompton Lakes, you pretty much can't operate your private well on your property because of the possibility that chemicals will be in the water table underground. In fact, New Jersey, as a result, has instituted the national, excuse me, excuse me for a second, the Private Well Testing Act. Have to get it right. The Private Well Testing Act that says anytime a private property is sold or rented to a residential tenant, if it has a water well on the property, that well must be tested for contaminants. And if contaminants are found, then either the owner has to put in a pretty much cost prohibitive filtration system or close the wellhead down and abandon it and switch to public water supply. Because you can't take the risk that contaminants will enter into the private well and contaminate the homeowners. Underground water tables are affected by chemical spills that could be miles away. Another town northwest of me by the name of Ringwood has a problem. But before I get there, let me do this. It's almost 2:30. If I start a story now, it's going to take us almost to 2:40. Why don't we just take a break now, come back at 3, and we'll finish up this chapter. We don't have a long way to go. We're almost there. We may get out just a few minutes early today, if that's okay with you. But if you would, let's take a break now. At 3 o'clock, we'll rejoin, and we'll finish up this chapter, and then we can go home. So I'll see you guys at 3. I'll leave the conversation open, and I'll see you at 3. All right, guys, welcome back. It's time to get started again. I see some people had some inquiry about that unclaimed property thing. I'll put the site up again in a sec. First, I'm going to moderate the conversation real quick. And I'm going to also post a link. recareercenter.com/review us. Guys, I'm asking if you would please, this is not mandatory, but it sure helps me, to click on that link and give us a review. Be honest with me. Let me know how we're doing. And are we giving you what you want? Does this course fit the bill? Are you experiencing something good, or is there a negative? I need to know, because I want to make sure that I give the best product to you guys, the students. If you would be so kind, I would really appreciate a review by clicking on recareercenter.com/review us. That way you can tell us honestly what you think. And I really do mean I want your honest opinion. If you feel it's good, tell me. If you think it sucks, tell me. I need to know, because every time we have a class, guys, I want to make sure we're putting forth our best foot and giving you everything you need to know. So that would help me a lot if you could do that. And again, I'll put in unclaimed property.nj.gov. That's the website for the unclaimed property. You should go there and see if there's anything that the state owes you. And if they do, click on the links, fill out the forms, and they'll notify you within a week or two what you're getting and how much. And within a couple weeks after that, you'll be getting a check for that amount. All right, so let's get back to our discussion. We were talking about groundwater contamination. And the fact is that now I was talking now about Ringwood, New Jersey. Well, in Ringwood, New Jersey, if you've ever been there, it's a beautiful little town. It's gorgeous. They have the Skylands Botanical Gardens, acres and acres of professionally cultivated flora and display gardens and formal gardens. And there's an old estate home there. They dress up for the Christmas season and stuff. It's really nice. And it's free to go to. There's also the Ringwood Manor. You may have even went there as a kid on a bus, on a field trip. Now, the Ringwood Manor property was owned by the Hewitt family a long time ago. H-E-W-I-T-T, Hewitt. They discovered iron ore up in the hills of the Ringwood Mountains and became very wealthy by mining all the iron ore out of those mountains. There's several big mine shafts that they access the iron ore veins from. And over time, those mines played out. The Hewitt family made a fortune by selling this iron to the U.S. Navy, military, industrial complexes at the time, and made a big fortune. So when they played the mine out, closed the mines, and then dedicated hundreds of acres plus the estate house, the formal gardens and everything to the state of New Jersey. So currently Ringwood Manor is a New Jersey state park that you can go and enjoy. You can they just redid the entire manor house. In fact, you can go up and take tours of this beautiful property. You can tour the formal gardens in the summer and see the beauty of it. There's hiking trails for miles and miles. You can picnic and recreate with your family. It's really a nice place to go and visit. But there's a problem. I'll come back to Ringwood in just a second. On the other hand, there was also Mahwah, New Jersey, north of where I live in Oakland, that had a Ford factory there. Ford built light-duty trucks and station wagons up until the mid-'70s. My neighbor Chris used to work there as an assembly line. And in the mid-'70s, they closed the Ford factory down, and now it's the Sheraton Crossroads Tower, and I think Sony has an office complex there. But anyway, the old painting contractor that Ford employed to paint their model cars, whenever a paint product would run out, they'd just take the old paint and go dump them up in the old Ringwood mines that have been abandoned for decades. And they did that from the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s into the 70s and dumped them, all those paint products, right down the old mine shafts in Ringwood. Today, 3 of those mines have been declared EPA toxic waste sites, with Peters Mine being the largest in waste site on the entire area. And it's projected that Peters Mine will cost about $56 million to clean up. It's a problem because all that paint, not just sitting in 1,000 feet in the ground anymore, from the last 40 and 50 years of rain, all that paint started to come back up and now is getting into the underground water supply up there. About 1.5 miles away from Ringwood Manor, about 2.5 miles from the mines themselves, is the Monksville and Wanacue reservoirs. These reservoirs are 2 of the 6 that the Newark Water Authority operates to bring residents of New Jersey fresh drinking water. If these contaminants reach those reservoirs, there goes 2 reservoirs as far as pure drinking water goes. So it could be a real big problem in your future if it's not taken care of. So you can see this underground water contamination is a huge problem. I'm just talking a couple towns around me. This isn't just regional, guys, it's across the United States. People always dumped products down into the ground to get rid of them because out of sight, out of mind. And that was the philosophy for decades. Unfortunately, we now realize that that was one stupid assumption we made because it's coming back to bite us in the arse. And yes, it's a huge problem. So groundwater contamination is a problem where all residents of the United States have to be concerned about. Was there a question or comment before I move ahead and finish off this topic? Just checking. The link doesn't work. Which one? The recareercenter.com/review us or the unclaimedproperty.newjersey.com or .gov rather. The link for reviewing it doesn't work. Crumb. Let me just check on recareercenter.com/review. Okay, so I'll have to let them know, but thank you. I appreciate it. We'll have that checked and I'll get you a new link for you by tomorrow. Oh, I made a mistake. Oh, I did. So let me retype it. I'm sorry. Here we go. recareercenter.com/review us. Let me just check. recareercenter.com. Yes, this is a better link. Boy, thank you for letting me know. Silly me. You know, my fat fingers and a keyboard don't mix. All right. So hopefully that solves the problem. And hopefully you guys find millions in the unclaimed property reports. So, okay, if you don't mind, and there was no other questions, I'm going to move on, but I'm going to wait a second. Thank you. I appreciate the comments, guys. I do. And if not, I'm going to moderate the conversation and finish up with underground storage tanks. And then we're going to go into environmental laws that you have to know about to pass the test. So here we go. Underground storage tanks. Now, underground storage tanks are a huge problem. Huge. Especially in the industrial Northeast, central north central U.S., and northwestern U.S., where cold climate zones are located. When home heating oil was introduced as a source of home heating fuel, they couldn't pipe it to every house. So what they did is they put on-site storage tanks for fuel to store in so that people can run a supply and have it refilled as necessary. My house is still on oil heat. I don't have any gas in the street in my neighborhood. A couple of years ago got a very high efficiency oil burning system and it works really well and I save a lot of money. And I have an oil tank, but it's not underground. It's in the basement of my house. It's in the basement protected from moisture in the soil that could cause the tank to rust and corrode. And because it's in the basement, it doesn't rust and corrode, and I keep an eye on it, inspect it every year, and I have my oil company come over and tune up my system and check the tank for any visible signs of problems, and never had a problem. However, most people don't have those storage tanks in the basement. They're very cumbersome and they're big. They take up a big space. So they put them in the ground outside of the basement. The problem is when they put those tanks in the ground outside, moisture starts to affect the metal of the tank and starts to oxidize it, causing it to rust. And as rust progressively encroaches, it starts to challenge the integrity of the tank itself, its shell. And after enough time, holes are punched into that tank because the rust just eats right through. And if that happens, oil drips out and contaminates the soil. There are hundreds of thousands of underground storage tanks throughout the entire northern tiers of the United States. Many of them have been located and removed, but many have not. In fact, about 15, 20 years ago, the state of New Jersey required that all gas stations had to remove all their underground storage tanks and replace them with double-walled polycarbon, all kinds of high-tech chemical walled systems that are not metal so they don't corrode underground. If one wall punctures, there's a secondary wall or hull to contain the spill. There's no law like that for residential homes. So if you have an underground storage tank, you better have it inspected for leaks. How do they do that? Next time your oil company comes to drop out, ask them, they do a pressure test for you. And if they do, they put a collar on the, a pressure gauge on the collar of the tank and pump up the pressure. If the air pressure holds in the tank and the needle stays constant, there's no holes in the tank. But if that needle starts to dip, that means there's a hole in the tank someplace, which means oil may be escaping into the soil. And if that's occurring, then the oil company is under law required to contact the EPA, which comes in force with spotlights and trucks and yellow tape, and then they start to dig up the tank. And if they find that oil, in fact, is leaking, they do test bores every 10 feet further away from the tank to see how far that contamination goes in the soil. And then clean up the soil and charge the homeowner for the cost of repair, which could be hundreds of thousands of dollars. Can I get an insurance policy to protect me against that? Yes, you can. If you have your test done and it doesn't lose pressure, then an oil tank insurance company, and there are several out there, will issue a tank insurance policy that if a leak ever does result, all you do is pay a small deductible and they take care of the cost of cleanup. Wonderful thing. So as a realtor showing property, the one thing I always ask the seller is, are you aware of any underground storage tanks on the property? And the answer I typically get is no. And then I always ask, have you performed a tank sweep to determine that? And they'll look at me and say, what? A tank sweep, what's that? Well, you hire an inspector who gets a metal detector and goes and pans the entire lawn to find out if there's anything underground. No, never did. So you're not positive there's no underground storage tanks. Is that right? I guess if that's what you're saying, then yeah, I really don't know. So, Mr. Buyer, as part of our inspection, we want to hire a tank sweep company to come in and sweep for underground storage tanks. So if we find one, the seller's going to have to remove it and get a certificate from the company that removed it that it was abandoned properly, and you have a certificate proving that. But if not, if you can't get a certificate and there's still tanks on there, then if you buy the house, you, Mr. Buyer, may be responsible for the cost of cleanup, knowing that you bought a house with underground storage tanks and never had the area checked. Just so you know. Well, we better have it inspected then and make sure the owner has to clean it up if there's an issue. Yes, exactly. So just like septic tanks, buyers have the right to do underground storage tank inspections to make sure that everything's kosher when buying a property. So, any final wrap-up questions to this discussion before we move on? So that's why investors hate oil tanks. Exactly. The cost of cleanup is phenomenal. I had this issue with the house I purchased, found prior to purchase. The seller had a large expense and big, yeah, good you found out before you purchased, Sherry, good. Propane tanks do not apply? Yes, they do. It's an underground storage tank. No matter if it leaks or not, that tank's metal may be deteriorating into the soil of your ground. You really need to get it out of the ground. If an underground oil tank isn't leaking, does the seller have to remove it? No. Can you do key term reviews real quick? I know there is answers in the book, but I'd rather you go. No, we don't do key term reviews in class. Sorry, Jimmy. Or Jinyu. Sorry, I don't do that. What happens if the seller can't afford the price of the cleanup? Then he's in trouble because the seller is responsible for the cost of cleanup. What the heck were people thinking? That's a good question, Patrick. Convenience. Put a tank over. By the way, before all these houses existed, this was all farmland. And if you're a farmer, you need to be self-sufficient 12 months a year. That means when there's 6 feet of snow on the ground, you still have to feed the cattle. You still have to run equipment. That means you need storage tanks for fuel oil, gasoline, kerosene, diesel, home heating oil, all kinds of things. And that was quite common and is still common on farm locations. Excuse me. Is it still best practice to fill in the tanks? No, you're not allowed to do that anymore. You actually have to remove the tank from the ground now. They no longer will let you abandon it in place. It has to be removed. How do I inspect the house to find out if I have one? Get a guy with a metal detector to go sweep your property and then dig up anything you find to find out. Wow. Wow, Sherry, that's amazing. 7 months for cleanup. Oof. All right, thanks for the comments, guys. I'm going to moderate and move on. So hazardous substances in residential properties are the ones we talked about here that you have to know about for a test. Asbestos, lead paint, radon, formaldehyde, mold, carbon monoxide, EMFs, groundwater contamination, underground storage tanks. Now, there's a whole bunch more, but that's not important to know about to pass a test. All right. So now we're going to finish up by discussing the environmental laws that took place to try to prevent and go after those culprits who polluted the soils and airs and everything else. The first environmental laws was called the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation and Liability Act. This was created in 1980 to clean up uncontrolled hazardous waste sites and to respond to toxic spills. It is administered by the Environmental Protection Agency and has very strict liability laws. Under CERCLA, the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation Liability Act, liability under this Superfund authorization, well, Superfund is money set up by the federal government to go to cost of cleanup of toxic waste sites. The first Superfund allocated $9 billion back in the day, which today is the equivalent of almost $100 billion. That was a lot of money back in the day. Currently, the yearly authorization for Superfund is about $75 million. It's very expensive to clean up these toxic waste sites. But liability under Superfund is considered to be strict, joint, and several, and retroactive. Strict meaning the owner is responsible to incur to the party injured without excuse. The seller of the property is responsible for the cost of cleanup, the owner of the property. Joint and several liability means that each of the individual owners of the business causing the spill or the toxin are equally personally responsible as well as corporately responsible. So where did I get that? On the bottom of page 141, last paragraph. Liability under superfund is considered to be strict, joint, and several, and retroactive, meaning going backwards through time to original causes. This was really a very severe and very strict policy under Superfund. In fact, it was deemed too strict and too severe because it was going after people who had nothing to do with polluting property. So you currently own a property that's contaminated. You're the owner under Superfund. You are responsible for the cost of cleanup, but you didn't cause it. It was happened 3 owners ago. You shouldn't be charged with the cost of cleanup. So they replaced CERCLA with ISRA. What? The Industrial Site Recovery Act and Wetlands Protection. Now, the Wetlands Protection Act originated in 1970 that said whenever you identify a wetland, that you can't build within 75 feet of it. When ISRA replaced CERCLA, when they reauthorized Superfund in '86, they created industrial identification codes, SIC, Standard Industrial Classification Codes. And every industry in the United States has an SIC code. Realtors have an SIC code, except when you look up our numbers, it says we're in the financial services industry. We don't manufacture, handle, store, warehouse, transport, use, or destroy chemicals. We convince people to spend a lot of money to buy houses. That's what we do. But if you manufacture, warehouse, or store, use, or dispose of, or transport any specific type of chemical, you have an SIC code that identifies you. Under this law, too, also, all shipped material must be accompanied by what's called material safety data sheets. Again, you don't have to know all this stuff. I'm just giving you the information here, which identify the products being transported, stored, warehoused, used, etc., and how to use them. So if a pollution of a chemical occurs today, they can go directly to an SIC code that covers that chemical to find out in the area who manufactures, warehouses, uses, or transports or destroys those chemicals, and go directly after those industry-specific targets for the cost of cleanup. And because it's so pinpoint accurate, they can actually cause companies to go out of business because of the cost of cleanup. Well, if they're going to pollute the environment, maybe they shouldn't be in business, in my opinion only. So the Industrial Site Recovery Act replaced CERCLA as the environmental law. Now, there are additional public land use control things we have to talk about before we finish up the chapter. It's only going to take a few minutes. First is public access to beach areas. In the United States, whenever you have a public beach, it is required that the public has a right to access those beaches. It's a public use. But what you didn't know is that New Jersey is the only state out of 50 to make you pay to get on the beaches. What? No, I'm serious. If you want to go down to Sandy Hook, you got to pay to park your car just to get on the beach. If you're going to go down to Seaside Heights and go on the beach, you got to get a permit or pay a fee to get on the beach, or at least pay a parking fee to get on the beach. Not any other state in the union charges its residents to get on the beach. Only New Jersey. New York does too, but only in a limited way. Crazy, crazy, crazy state we live in. But the public has the right to access beach areas. When we were talking the other day about littoral properties abutting the beachfront, and I told you at high tide, well, the public can't transverse your property by going onto your property and moving over. You can't do that. However, at low tide, you don't own below the high water mark, so they can publicly use that beach free of encumbrance. You can't prevent them from not using it. It's a public right to use. There's also landmark preservation rulings which restrict the right and the ability to alter certain older buildings. Some properties are registered under landmark preservation's historic significance. And if so, there's very specific rules about what you can and can't do with these properties. Inside the properties, you can do anything you want. But on the exterior of the building, you may not be able to change anything from the original architecture or color. In fact, in Oakland, where I live, we have the historic Van Allen House. The Van Allen House was a farmstead built in the mid-1700s, 1750-ish. And on his trip through New Jersey, General George Washington slept at the Van Allen House. Now, it seems from my history education that George Washington slept around a lot in New Jersey. No wonder he's the father of our country, right? Oh, I'm kidding, come on. But it's historically significant because George Washington slept there. A few years ago, about 10 years ago, when I was a councilman, we had a problem with a leak in the roof of the Van Allen House. In order to fix it, I could have called up my crew at the time and said, go and put a new roof on that house. It may have cost me $7,000 or $8,000 to do. Rip off the old one, put a new water dam and a moisture dam up there, put some asphalt shingles. We're done in a day, and it's all done. But you can't do that with historically landmarked properties. In fact, in order to replace the roof of the Van Allen House, we had to go get bids from specialty contractors who are versed in the techniques and usage of tools that were used in 1750 when that house was built. They couldn't use modern polyvinyl products or asphalt shingles. What they had to use is tongue and groove boards as a substrate, and then hand cut cedar shake shingles to put on the roof, which takes a huge amount of labor and effort. And the fact is, you can't use power tools because it must be done in the same venue as it was done in 1750 with hand tools. And back then they used hand cut and hand poured lead nails. Well, you can't use lead, so it's now hand poured and hand cut titanium nails, which cost a fortune to make. But that's what they have to do to replace the roof. So when all was said and done, $72,000 later, we had a new roof. And I'm not stretching the fact here that it's very expensive to maintain an historically landmark property. There are certain colors that the Historic Commission may only allow that building to be painted, and it must be colors that existed at the time. And there was only a few colors back then. So on the outside of the building, you may not be able to alter the exterior in any way. And if you're doing restoration work, it costs you a small fortune to have done because it has to replicate exactly what was done when that building was built. And then there's the direct public ownership control. And what's that? Your borough hall, your rec fields are owned by the residents of the town. In other words, they have direct public ownership of borough hall, town hall, the rec fields, the roads. The public owns those things, not a politician. The public owns that. And that's why we have the ability to vote to fund construction, renovation, maintenance, and repair of these items because it's our property. So the philosophy of direct public ownership is a very critical part of government in the United States. So, in effect, all these things have a certain obligation on the public, whether it's a private deed restriction or public land use controls. Streets, highways, municipal buildings, here, parks and wildlife preserve are direct public ownership issues. Environmental problems and toxins have to be addressed and remediated when needed. All these things have been covered in this chapter. We're done with the chapter. And if you have any follow-up questions, now's the time to hit me up before I pull up the review questions and call it a day. Does anybody have any final last-minute comments or questions before I pull up the review questions? And by the way, I noticed somebody asked a question, where do I get all the answers for the review questions? They're in the back of the book. Every chapter review has answers in the back of the book. Can you show slide? No, I'm not going back through slides. All the information's in your book. All these slides are taken directly from your book, and I'm not going back, sorry. Was there any other questions? So if Ford caused the contamination in the 70s, how are they not bankrupt? Well, here's the thing. The paint contractor was not a division of Ford. It was a private paint contractor. And Ford said, not our responsibility. However, Ford is going to contribute several $1 million towards the cost of cleanup, even though they're not liable for it. They will contribute to the cost of cleanup. Stephen, what was the question? Okay, the slides, once again, guys, the PowerPoint is directly taken from the book. All you have to do is read the book, and your PowerPoints are directly taken from there. Tim, can you clarify public access to beach? A few chapters back, we discussed that if you own a shoreline beach, then it's considered real property up to the average high tide mark only. But at low tide, the private property owner does not own below the high tide mark. That is open to public access. So they're not trespassing on the beach when it's at low tide, but they would be if they went across your property at high tide because they don't want to go swimming. You didn't mention how the landmark preservation affects homes outside the area, it not in book, and that's why I didn't mention it. I know it says something about that, but it's not in here that specifically goes into that record. What I'm assuming is that if you have a historical district, those buildings must be maintained according to the National Landmark Preservation Trust rules. If it's outside of that area, not in the historic district, it may not have to be specifically upkept and taken care of by those rules if it's not historical property. All right. Anybody else? I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to moderate here. Unless specified in the deed. Okay, I'll accept that. Yes. All right, here we go. I'm going to bring up the review chapter questions for this chapter. And then we'll be done for the day. And now we're on chapter 9. By the way, tomorrow is one of my favorite topics. First half of the day is about listing agreements. Second half about contracts. I love contracts. All right, here we go. Number 1. Every parcel in the subdivision has a deed restriction forbidding basketball backboards on front-facing garages. A homeowner puts one up anyhow. The neighbors may force him to remove it by, it's a private deed restriction. How can they cure a private deed restriction infringement? And from those responses, about 2 out of 3, 66.5% of you got it correct. It is D for dog, going to court. Remember, a private deed restriction can only be enforced through court order or neighbor pressure. Can't be done through the public, the municipality. Number 2, the grantor of real estate may place effective deed restrictions forbidding so you guys gotta get out there and play those Powerball and Mega Millions tickets. I heard it's getting up to like a $500 million. Ooh-wee. You buy a couple houses with that. Grantor of real estate may place effective deed restrictions forbidding remember that they can't restrict future sales, so A could not be the answer. And they can't be discriminatory in the restrictions, so it can't be B either. Therefore, it can't be D. Therefore, by process of elimination, oh, look, 90% of us got it correct. It is C, the division of parcels into smaller building lots. That is a possibility in a deed restriction, but the others are not. Number 3, the developer of an exclusive subdivision places a restriction on the deeds requiring 250 feet of road frontage for each building lot. The town code requires only 100 feet. One property owner obtains a permit to construct 2 houses on his 250-foot lot. His neighbors can While we're answering these questions, guys, I put some of those links back up there for your consideration. If you would review us, that would be great. I'd appreciate it. So for question 3, the answer of which 49% of you got correct is A, ask the court to order one house torn down. It's a private deed restriction. Only the courts can cure the problem. Number 4, the government police power allows it to regulate and about 74% of you answered correctly D, all of the above. Yes. Number 5. The state needs to run a new expressway through a farm. The farmer does not agree to sell the necessary land. The state may then try to exert its right of eminent domain through a court proceeding known as and from those responding, 3 out of 4 yes, 75% got it correct. C, condemnation, correct. Number 6, the right of escheat allows New Jersey to acquire land And it looks like 90% of you got this correct. B for boy, when someone dies without leaving a will or heirs. Correct. B. Number 7. A real estate salesman shows a pre-World War I house to a prospective buyer who has 2 toddlers and is worried about potential health hazards. In this situation, In this situation, 88% of you got it correct. C, because the house was built in before 78, there's good likelihood of presence of lead paint in the house and federal disclosure laws must be complied with. Yes, C. Number 8, a non-conforming use is allowed And from those who did respond, about 83% of you got it correct. D, if it existed before the area was zoned. Remember, a pre-existing non-conforming use is allowed to continue because it was done before the zoning codes took effect. Number 9, a physician goes before his local zoning board asking for permission to open an office in his residential neighborhood because the area has no medical facilities. He's asking for a, what does zoning board give out? And about 60% of us are correctly answering A, a variance. Special use permits are usually temporary in nature and are usually at the discretion of the mayor and council and issued through the planning board. So A, variance is the answer. Number 10. A homeowner asked the zoning board to allow him to build a fence to keep his children out of traffic on a busy corner. Since the owner does not have room for the required 10-foot setback, he's asking for a boy, twice as many people answered special use permit again. And I told you, no. What does the zoning board give out? Variances. A, yes. A is the only answer, guys. Number 11, an example of a private land use control is, example of a private land use control is, and 78% of us are correct in answering B for boy, deed restrictions. Those are private land use controls. 12, the building inspector who has determined that construction is satisfactory may issue a and 90% of you who answered got it correct, a certificate of occupancy A. 13, the purpose of building permits is to, not TWO, TO. That's a bad typo. The purpose of a building permit is to excuse me. Oh. And 91% of you are correct answering C, provide evidence of compliance with municipal regulations. Yes. Number 14, a Greek revival home is located in a historic preservation district. The owner probably may not change and about 65% of you are correct answering B, the exterior of the building. Remember, I did say they can do anything inside they want. It's the outside that's the problem. Number 15, liability under the Superfund is, what were those words I used again? Excuse me. And 85% of you are correct answering D, strict, joint, and several, and retroactive. Those were the words we used. Number 16, the Lead-Based Paint Hazard Reduction Act oh boy, excuse me. And 70% of you answered correctly B, requires that known lead-based paint hazards be disclosed to potential purchasers and renters. Yes. 17, which of the following materials is considered an environmental hazard due to its friable nature? There was only one that I said fits this category. Which one was it? Oh boy, excuse me. And about 87% of you correctly answered A, asbestos. Yes, A, asbestos. Number 18, which of these is subjected but I'm sorry, which of these is suspected but not proven to be hazardous to human health? Now, during the break, someone, what was it? His name was Gregory, I think, gave a very good scientific explanation about EMFs. I thought that was brilliant, and I appreciated the comment, but then you removed it. I thought it was pretty interesting. Oh, did I just give the answer away? Oh, darn. Yeah, so 97% of you got C correct. Electromagnetic fields. Last two questions before we're done, guys. Number 19. The most common source of lead contamination in residential property is... Oh, boy, excuse me. Got up way too early today. And 91%, well done, is B, chipping paint. Yes. And the last question for today's review. Buyers and sellers should be alerted to the possibility of mold when a house has... And there we go, 94% of you got it. D, signs of moisture. Yes, well done today, guys. Real good. Good class. A lot of information, a lot of topics covered, but it looks like you did a good job retaining that information. Now, for tonight, chapters 8 and 9 for homework at recareercenter.com/homework. I put the link on the board, and I think I spelled that correctly. By the way, if you're looking for the answers to the homework, it's in the same spot. You can cheat if you want. I don't check. You don't turn your homeworks in. They're good study guides to use. And then tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., we'll start chapters 10, listing agreements, one of my favorite topics. And then our afternoon session will be on contracts, another one of my favorite topics to discuss. So if you could pre-read those for tomorrow, that would help. If not, you guys are done for the day. I appreciate your participation in the classroom. Good comments and suggestions today. Again, we always drift off topic, but that's expected now these days. So if you would be so great as to give me a review, I would appreciate it. If you got any questions you want to send me, my email address is on there as well. If not, you're done for the day. Go home. Have a great evening. And more coffee? No. When I get home, it's time for the hard stuff. And we'll see you tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. So guys, have a great evening. I appreciate your participation. Hope to see you here at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Have a great night. If you want, stick around. If you got questions, I'll answer them. Thanks.